The West rarely finishes you with a clean shot. More often it grinds you down with quiet, with thirst, with an endless stretch of land so empty it eats your hope piece by piece. In the Arizona Territory of 1878, the frontier was a proving ground, one that stripped a person bare until only their truest self remained. This was no campfire tale of pistols and poker tables. This was a story carved into sand and bone, about a bond no one expected to survive the desert. It was the story of Ivy Rourke, abandoned to die, and Narek, the Chiricahua Apache chief, whose word carried the weight of law, and whose mercy ran deeper than the hidden springs beneath the rock. The first thing Ivy noticed was the taste of iron in her mouth. Blood. Her blood. The realization came with a jagged breath that tore through her ribs, sending pain branching through her chest like wildfire. Her vision swam in rust-colored dust beneath a sky so violently blue it felt cruel. Only a day earlier, this same clearing had been alive with ordinary comforts, the soft clink of harness chains, her father, Tobias Rourke, humming a tune from back east, the low, patient sounds of their oxen. They had not come west to farm. They were men of stone and paper, geologists, map makers, a family chasing rumors of a rare silver seam. In the Dragoon Mountains they carried charts instead of scriptures, instruments instead of extra guns. That choice had doomed them. The attack had come without warning. No shouted orders, no battle cries, just swift, brutal precision. Violence delivered quietly, efficiently, without hesitation. The men who struck them wore filth and hatred on their faces. Their clothes were a mockery, settler rags mixed with stolen native trinkets, a lie stitched together to serve a darker purpose. They hadn't stopped at looting. They had savored the ruin. Ivy could still see it, the lifeless gleam in one man's eye as the butt of his Remington crashed down on her father's skull. Her scream had been cut short by a blow that sent her tumbling into darkness. Now, the silence pressed in from all sides. Flies buzzed thick in the air, the only mourners left. Her family lay scattered near the wreckage of the wagon. Maps, years of Tobias's work, were torn and crushed into the blood-soaked dirt. Her throat locked as a sob scraped its way up, dry and painful. Staying meant dying. And dying here meant letting them win. Summoning everything she had left, Ivy forced herself upright. The world lurched. Her left arm dangled uselessly, agony confirming the shoulder was out of place. Blood streamed from a gash on her forehead, clouding one eye. She staggered forward, barely human, and nearly collapsed over the still body of her younger brother, Cole. 16 years old, his eyes were open, fixed on the merciless sky. Grief slammed into her so hard it stole her breath. Her knees buckled. Then she heard it. Not soldiers, not wagons. Hooves. Bare hooves. Soft. Measured. Terror snapped through her. She dragged herself behind the dead ox, heart pounding against shattered ribs. Through a narrow gap she saw them. Not impostors. Warriors. Their dark hair was bound simply. Their skin carried the deep tone of the land itself. Spears and bows rested easily in their hands. At their front rode a man on a pinto horse, authority radiating from him like heat from stone. He was tall, unmistakably so. His face was hard, carved by years and battle. His eyes missed nothing. Scars crossed his bare chest, each one unreadable. This was no raiding party. This was a patrol. Purposeful. Controlled. far more frightening than chaos. This was the man whispered about in Tucson, the one they called Narek, chief of the Shadow Canyon Shirakawa. They said he was a ghost, that his warriors vanished into the canyons at his will, that his judgment struck fast and final as lightning, that he had never been beaten, only challenged once, by a young warrior who was never seen again. He was the chief, and no one disobeyed him. He raised one hand. 5 warriors stopped instantly. His eyes moved across the slaughter, unreadable. No pity, no pleasure, only calculation. Like a hawk, his gaze traced the drag marks from the wagon to the ox. He understood. A younger warrior, fire in his eyes, leveled his spear toward Ivy's hiding place and spoke sharply in his own language. A survivor. Cold flooded her veins. This was the end her parents had feared, the Apache taking her. Ivy squeezed her eyes shut, clutching a smooth quartz stone she and Cole had found together, knuckles white. Footsteps approached. She didn't look. She waited for steel, for fire, for the last pain. A shadow fell over her. She smelled horse sweat and sage, clean and wild. The silence thickened, heavy enough to choke on. She forced her eyes open. Narek stood above her, studying her without hatred, only a calm, unsettling focus. His gaze moved from the blood and dust smeared across her face to the limp angle of her arm, then settled on the fear she refused to hide. The younger warrior, Ro, spoke sharply, impatience cutting through his words. She is White Eyes, a trespasser. Let me end it. Narek did not look at Ro. He did not look away from Ivy Rourke. His eyes seemed to press through her, weighing something unseen. Weakness or resolve? He noticed the quartz clenched in her fist, her last defense, a useless stone held for memory rather than harm. For a long, breathless moment, Ivy's fate hung between them, suspended in the still air shared by a broken woman and an unyielding chief. He took in the bodies scattered across the clearing, the work of white men wearing borrowed skins, a familiar deceit meant to kindle war. He saw a survivor, shattered yet not yielded. Killing her would be simple. Leaving her would mean death just the same. He chose. Whatever guided him stayed locked behind his expression. He turned slightly and spoke one quiet command in the Chiricahua tongue. The words were low, almost gentle, but they carried absolute authority. Ro's jaw tightened. Disbelief flashed in his eyes before he lowered his spear. Another warrior, older, broad-shouldered, slid down from his horse. He approached Ivy slowly, hands open, empty. She recoiled, dragging herself back until her spine met the stiff hide of the dead ox. The warrior stopped, releasing a sound that might have been understanding. He pointed at her shoulder, then mimed a sharp pull. He meant to help. The idea clashed so violently with everything she had ever been taught that her fear slipped into stunned confusion. Narek spoke again, his voice a low rumble, aimed not at her, but at his men. It was an order. The older warrior, Tal, as she would later learn, moved with unexpected care. Before Ivy could protest, he steadied her body and set his grip. Pain tore a cry from her as he snapped her shoulder back into place. Relief followed instantly. So sudden it left her gasping, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. Dazed, she felt herself lifted. Narek remained mounted, unmoving, his face carved from stone as his warriors assembled a crude travois. They worked with detached efficiency, securing her for travel. She was cargo now, a problem being managed. As they started forward, Ivy twisted for one last look at the clearing, at the shapes of her family strewn among the wreckage. This was a waking nightmare. She was being pulled from death by the very people she had been taught to fear, saved by a chief whose name settlers spat like a curse. Captive, burden, or something else entirely, she could not tell. As the sun sank low, staining the sky red and gold, Ivy Rourke was drawn away from the ruins of her past into a future darker and more uncertain than anything she had imagined. She lived by the decree of the one man no one dared defy, and she did not know if that mercy would damn or deliver her. The journey blurred into fever. She drifted in and out of awareness, the steady jolt of the travois a dull, constant ache. The land passed in streaks of red stone, towering saguaros, and the silent backs of Apache warriors. When they stopped, a water skin was pressed to her lips. The water was cold, pure. A paste of crushed leaves, sharp and medicinal, was pressed into the cut on her head by a warrior named Koa. There were no words, no explanations, only precise actions meant to keep her alive. They pushed deeper into the Dragoon Mountains, along paths invisible to her eye. The terrain grew harsher, wilder. Narrow canyons swallowed them in shadow, offering brief shelter from the relentless sun. It felt like crossing into forbidden ground. At last, they arrived. The camp lay hidden in a wide valley, a natural stronghold guarded by sheer cliffs on three sides. It was larger than she expected, alive with hide shelters, cooking fires, and the low pulse of daily life. Children froze mid-play, staring openly. Women paused over hides and stone mills, watching the warriors return with their strange burden. Ivy was carried to a small, secluded wickiup at the edge of the camp and lowered onto a bed of furs. Moments later, an elderly woman entered. Her face was etched deep with years, every line earned. Her eyes were sharp, assessing. This was Senna, the tribe's healer, a woman whose quiet authority rivaled Narek's own. Senna examined Ivy's wounds with practiced hands, murmuring softly. She spoke in a flow of Apache, her tone unexpectedly gentle. Ivy understood none of it. The old woman tended Ivy's injuries again, this time bathing them with a warm herbal wash that calmed the inflamed skin. She pressed a cup of bitter tea into Ivy's hands. It dulled the pain and pulled her under into a heavy, dreamless sleep. For days afterward, Ivy's world narrowed to the dim hush of the wickiup and the steady presence of Senna. Senna became her keeper and healer, her constant, wordless companion. She brought bowls of thin broth and small cakes ground from mesquite flour. The flavors were unfamiliar, but the food carried strength. Little by little, Ivy felt herself returning. The fog of grief and pain thinned, replaced by a sharp awareness of where she was. She was being held, yet no ropes bound her. The care unsettled her more than cruelty would have. It felt like kindness built into a cage, and that confusion left her unsteady. The one who made no effort to hide his hostility was the young warrior, Ro. He often stood outside her wickiup, arms folded tight, his expression carved from contempt. To him, she was a venomous thing foolishly carried into their home. He voiced his anger openly in council, raising his voice against his chief. Ivy could not understand the language, but the fury carried clearly. "She is a bad sign," Ro argued one evening, his words echoing across the quiet camp. "The White Eyes who did this will come for her. She will lead them straight to us. She is not our burden." "You should have left her for the vultures." Narek's reply came low and even, yet it cut the air clean. "I am chief." I decide who is our burden. Watch your tongue, or I will cut it from your mouth." The threat was delivered so calmly, it left no room for doubt. The matter ended there. Narek remained distant and imposing, a figure of gravity moving through the camp, drawing respect without effort. He never spoke to Ivy, yet she felt his attention often. His gaze was measured, analytical, as if he were studying a strange creature brought in from the wild. He seemed to be waiting. One afternoon, while Ivy sat in the sun outside her shelter, Sina brought her a scrap of buckskin and a bone needle. The old woman sat beside her and began stitching a torn moccasin, her hands sure and practiced. She glanced at Ivy, then at the buckskin resting in her lap. An invitation. Hesitant, Ivy took the tools. Her mother had taught her to sew. She worked careful stitches into the tear of her own ruined dress. The small act of shared labor bridged the silence between them. As her hands moved, Ivy truly began to see the camp. She saw women laughing softly with their children. She saw men shaping arrows with patient focus. She saw people proud, layered, and bound tightly to the unforgiving land they lived upon. These were not the simple monsters of settler stories. They were human. The truth unsettled her. The moment that shattered her last illusion came a week into her captivity. Ro, still raw from his public rebuke by Narek, strode toward her. He knew enough English from trading and skirmishes to make his meaning sharp, and he spat the words like venom. "You look at us," he sneered, sweeping his hand across the camp. "You think we are savages? You think we killed your family?" Ivy flinched, her fingers closing around the locket at her throat, the tiny images of her parents inside. "I don't know what to think." Ro leaned closer, his voice dropping to a vicious whisper. "The men who did it wore boots. Cavalry boots." Their faces were white under the dirt. Narek's scouts followed them. They rode back toward Redemption Gulch, not into the mountains. Ivy stared at him as the ground seemed to shift. Redemption Gulch, the dust-choked mining town, the last place of order she and Tobias Rourke had passed through. The attackers had not been Apache. They were white men, men disguised as Apache to stir hatred, to justify posses, to drive the Chiricahua from their land. The memory of one man's cold eyes surged back. He had not looked like the men here. His features were sharp, his hair dirty blonde, tucked beneath stolen feathers. Her grief ignited into fury. The man who had taken her was not her enemy. Her enemy walked free among her own people, perhaps drinking whiskey in the very saloon her family had entered days before. That evening, Narek approached her wickiup. It was the first time he had come so close since bringing her to the camp. He stood in silence for a moment, then spoke in a low, steady voice. He did not use Ro's broken English. He spoke a few words of Spanish, a language Ivy knew from her mother, who had grown up in Southern California. "La mujer vieja te llama Inata," he said quietly. "The old woman calls you Inata." "What does it mean?" Ivy Rourke asked, her Spanish rough with disuse. "Mourning dove," Narek replied. "She says you are like the dove that survives the winter. But a dove is also a messenger." He studied her then, and for the first time she glimpsed something beneath the stone-cold mask. A flicker, almost a question. He knew Ro had spoken to her. He knew the truth had settled in her mind. "The men who attacked my family," Ivy said, her voice unsteady with fear and a new, terrible clarity. "They went to Redemption Gulch." Narek inclined his head once, slowly. They hide in your world, he said. They teach your people that we are monsters. Then my world is built on lies, she whispered, more to herself than to him. She looked up at the chief, the man who held her life by choice, not force. He was no longer merely her captor. He was the only one who knew the truth, the only one with the power to act on it. The fear she had carried since the clearing loosened its grip, replaced by a fragile, frightening realization. He was not her enemy. He might be her only path to justice. An unspoken pact, thin as a spider's thread, began to form within the heart of the Apache stronghold. Redemption Gulch baked under the afternoon sun, a festering sprawl of clabbered buildings and dust-choked ambition. At its center, both by map and by influence, stood the Pike Ranch and Freight Company. Its owner, Vaughn Pike, cast a shadow long enough to darken the entire town. Once a cavalry major, Pike had been stripped of rank for what official reports called excessive zeal during a campaign against the Navajo, though whispers spoke of outright slaughter. He was not fueled by simple greed. What drove him was a deep, abiding hatred for the land's original people and a relentless hunger to claim the canyons and mountains as his own. To Pike, manifest destiny was not an idea. It was a personal entitlement. The Apache, especially Narek's band, were an obstacle. They blocked his surveyors, his claims, his reach into the mineral-rich Dragoon Mountains, the very silver vein the Rourke family had died seeking. He sat in his office, behind a polished oak desk, a bottle of costly whiskey beside him, far removed from the filthy saloons where miners drank away their wages. Across from him lounged his right hand, Lyle Brand, thin, sharp-faced, and loyal only to coin. "The Rourkes are dead," Lyle reported, pouring himself a drink. "All of them. We staged it just like you wanted. Wagon wrecked, gear taken, made it look like an Apache raid. The whole town's buzzing. Amos Reed is talking about raising a posse." Pike swirled the amber liquid in his glass, a thin smile cutting across his face. Reed is an idiot. A posse of drunk miners would only get themselves killed. No, we let the fear grow. We let the governor hear about it. We need soldiers, Lyle. Real ones. "There's a problem," Lyle said, lowering his voice. "The girl. Ivy Rourke. Her body wasn't there." Pike's smile vanished. He set the glass down hard. "What do you mean it wasn't there? You searched the entire site?" "There were drag marks," Lyle said, "leading east, into the Dragoons." Pike rose and moved to the window, staring toward the hazy blue outline of distant peaks. "Narek's land," he murmured. "So the chief has her." The words came out soft and poisonous. This was no inconvenience. It was catastrophe. A living witness. A white woman. Who could name him? Who could swear her family was butchered, not by Apache, but by men from Redemption Gulch? "She's probably dead by now," Lyle offered, though doubt crept into his voice. "Don't be stupid," Pike snapped. "Narek isn't simple. If he kept her alive, it's for a reason. She's worth more breathing than buried. He'll turn her into a weapon." Pike's thoughts raced. He couldn't risk a large force. Apache eyes would spot them miles away. He needed someone quieter, someone who knew the land. "Find Creed Halver," Pike ordered. "The prospector, the one who lived with the Utes for a time. Offer him $500. I want to know where Narek's camp is, and I want to know if the girl is alive." Back in Shadow Canyon, Ivy's place among the Apache was shifting. Armed with the truth, she was no longer only a captive waiting to be decided. She carried purpose now.
She sought out Narek, where he stood inspecting the tribe's horses.
Using broken Spanish and urgent gestures, Ivy told him everything she remembered. The attackers' faces, their weapons, the way they moved, the maps they stole. Each detail tightened the shape of the threat. She described the leader in detail, the dirty blonde hair, the cold, lifeless eyes, the rifle he carried. Not an old army piece, but a new Sharps, rare on the frontier. She spoke of the stolen papers, repeating the word mapa, tracing lines in the dirt with shaking fingers. Plata. Silver. They wanted the location. Narek listened without interruption, his face giving nothing away. But he understood. This had not been random slaughter. It had been an execution, precise and deliberate, meant to steal knowledge. Von Pike was not merely a bigot, he was a methodical thief. Her account matched what his scouts had already sensed, sharpening the outline of the danger closing around them. For the first time, Narek no longer saw Ivy Rourke only as Inata, the mourning dove who survived. He saw her as something else, useful, a bearer of truth, a reluctant ally. Trust, however, was never freely given. He chose to test her. He told Senna to loosen Ivy's restrictions, to allow her to move through the camp, to observe and engage. He wanted to see what she would choose. Would she run? Would she betray them? Ivy chose to learn. She watched the women scrape and tan hides, not with revulsion, but with the focused curiosity of someone who studied the world for a living. She followed Senna into the hills, learning which plants healed and which poisoned. She practiced new words in the Chiricahua tongue: water, food, thank you. She showed respect. She lowered her eyes when warriors passed. She avoided sacred ground. Slowly, almost invisibly, she began to belong. Ro noticed everything. His suspicion never softened. To him, her growing acceptance was a lie taking root. One afternoon, he confronted her beside the stream where she gathered water for Senna. "You learn our ways," he said in rough English. "You smile at our children. You think this makes you one of us." A white woman can never be Apache. "I'm not trying to be Apache," Ivy answered, steady despite the fear he stirred. "I'm trying to survive, and I want the men who killed my family punished. They are your enemies too." "Our only enemy is the white man," Ro snarled. "The man leading them is white," she shot back. "And he's using you, using fear to take what he wants. Can't you see that?" Her bluntness caught him off guard. Before he could answer, Narek's voice cut through the air, sharp, final. He called Ro's name. The young warrior stiffened as if struck. He cast Ivy one last burning look before turning away to face his chief. Ivy knew then she had crossed the line and passed a test. Days later, a scout rode hard into camp. His horse foamed and trembling, his expression grim. He reported a lone white man, likely a prospector, moving quietly through the outer canyons, following their trail. Creed Halver had found them. The reach of Von Pike was closing in. The fragile peace of the camp was about to shatter. The kindness that had sheltered Ivy was about to be tested by fire. Narek summoned his senior warriors. His face was carved from stone. The time for watching was finished. The time for action had come. The report sent a ripple through the camp. "Not Pan. The man who hunts us will bring others," Narek said in Spanish, his voice calm and absolute. "My scouts will follow him, but he is only a sign. The sickness is Pike." "What will you do?" Ivy asked, her heart pounding. "We will not be cornered in our home," he replied. "The women Children and elders will move to the high caves, places they cannot reach. The warriors will remain.
We will meet them here,